In a landmark decision that could reshape the future of U.S. trade policy, a federal appeals court has ruled that former President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs are illegal, marking a significant blow to one of the most defining aspects of his administration's economic agenda. On August 29, 2025, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit found that Trump overstepped the authority Congress granted him, specifically in the way he imposed tariffs on a wide range of imported goods. This ruling challenges one of the most controversial policies of the Trump administration, which not only reshaped global trade relationships, but also imposed major costs on American businesses and consumers. The tariffs, which affected everything from steel and aluminum to everyday consumer products, sparked retaliation from trading partners and led to higher prices for many U.S. goods. The court affirmed a lower court's decision, creating a powerful legal challenge to the president's use of emergency powers for economic policy. Legal experts say this could set a precedent for how much authority future presidents have to unilaterally alter trade policy. The court concluded that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 was never meant to allow broad, open-ended tariffs on imports, but was instead designed for targeted, temporary measures in times of genuine national emergency. By invalidating the legal foundation of these tariffs, the court has set the stage for a potential multi-billion-dollar reckoning for the U.S. government and a likely Supreme Court showdown that could redefine the limits of presidential power in economic matters. For now, the tariffs remain in place, as the court has paused its ruling to allow the administration to seek Supreme Court review. This means businesses and consumers will continue to feel the impact while the legal battle continues. The case, VOS Selections v. Trump, was brought by small businesses and states, arguing they were harmed by tariffs lacking a proper legal basis. Many of these businesses say the tariffs forced them to raise prices, cut jobs, or even close their doors. The outcome will have a lasting impact on American law, trade policy, and the global economy, potentially influencing how the U.S. engages with its trading partners for years to come. These tariffs are unprecedented in scope, applying a baseline 10% duty on nearly all goods from over 60 trading partners, marking a dramatic shift in U.S. trade policy. For decades, the United States has relied on targeted tariffs, but this sweeping approach signals a new era of economic strategy. The list of affected countries is extensive, including major economies like the EU, Japan, and South Korea, as well as smaller trading partners. This means that products from all corners of the globe are now subject to these new duties. Some rates reached as high as 50%, putting immense pressure on industries dependent on global supply chains. Factories have struggled to keep up with rising costs, and many have had to slow or halt production altogether. The administration justified the tariffs as reciprocal measures to counter foreign trade barriers and as tools to combat drug trafficking from countries like China, Canada, and Mexico. Officials argue that these steps are necessary to protect American interests and national security. Critics, however, argue that using broad tariffs to address drug smuggling is ineffective and misuses trade policy. Many economists warn that such sweeping measures risk damaging relationships with key allies and could backfire on American businesses. Unlike past targeted tariffs, these duties affect a vast array of goods from electronics to food, forcing companies to either absorb costs or pass them to consumers. Small businesses in particular have struggled to adapt, facing tough decisions about pricing and staffing. The result? Higher prices for American households and widespread economic disruption. Everyday essentials have become more expensive and families are feeling the pinch at the checkout counter. Businesses have faced tough choices, and the ripple effects have touched millions of Americans. Layoffs, reduced hours, and even closures have become more common as companies struggle to stay afloat. The sheer breadth of these tariffs sets them apart from any previous U.S. trade measure, making this a defining moment in the nation's approach to global commerce and economic policy. The Trump administration relied on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to justify the tariffs. This law, passed in 1977, was designed to give the president special authority to respond quickly to unusual and extraordinary threats from abroad, especially those involving national security or foreign policy. IEPA allows the president to regulate international commerce after declaring a national emergency, but it's historically been used for targeted sanctions, not sweeping tariffs. Typically, presidents have invoked IEPA to freeze assets or block transactions with specific foreign entities, rather than to impose broad economic measures affecting entire industries or countries. Trump's team argued that unfair trade practices and drug trafficking at the border were national emergencies, warranting broad economic action. They claimed these issues posed a direct threat to the United States, justifying the use of IEEPA to implement tariffs on a wide range of goods. The court disagreed, emphasizing that the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to tax and regulate trade. The judges noted that while the President has significant authority in emergencies, those powers are not unlimited, and must be clearly defined by law. The judges found no clear language in IEEPA authorizing such broad tariffs. Instead, the law's text and legislative history pointed to a much narrower use, focused on specific threats and targeted actions. They ruled that IEEPA was meant for targeted sanctions, not for rewriting U.S. trade policy or bypassing Congress's constitutional role in setting tariffs and trade rules. The court invoked the major questions doctrine, saying Congress must clearly authorize actions of vast economic significance. This doctrine requires that if the executive branch wants to take actions with major national impact, it must have explicit approval from Congress. Since IEEPA lacked explicit permission for these tariffs, the court found the President exceeded his authority. The decision reinforced the principle that emergency powers cannot be used to circumvent the normal legislative process. This decision sets a crucial precedent for the limits of executive power in trade, reminding future presidents that even in times of crisis, their authority is bound by the Constitution and the clear intent of Congress. The financial stakes are enormous. Since their implementation, the tariffs have generated over $140 billion in revenue for the U.S. Treasury, more than double the previous year's amount. The administration touted this as a deficit-reducing measure, but most economists say the costs are borne by American companies and consumers. If the Supreme Court upholds the ruling, the government could be forced to refund billions to businesses that paid the tariffs. This would turn a major revenue stream into a massive expenditure, complicating federal budget projections. For businesses, the tariffs have meant higher costs, lost competitiveness, and uncertainty. Some industries benefited, but many faced retaliatory tariffs abroad. The court's decision offers hope for a return to stability, but the financial and economic fallout could be huge. The outcome will reshape the landscape for American companies and the federal budget. The Trump administration responded swiftly and defiantly to the court's decision. President Trump condemned the ruling as partisan and warned of disaster if the tariffs are removed, vowing to appeal to the Supreme Court. The White House echoed this stance, insisting the legal fight is far from over and projecting confidence in their position. Officials argue the tariffs are essential for national security and foreign policy, framing the issue as more than just economics. The administration's legal strategy centers on broad executive authority under IEEPA, claiming the president needs flexibility to address global threats. The battle now shifts to the Supreme Court, where the administration will argue for expansive presidential power in trade and emergencies. The 7-4 split among appellate judges highlights deep divisions over presidential power. The majority argued that Congress alone has the power to tax and regulate trade, and that IEEPA was never meant to authorize sweeping tariffs. They saw the administration's actions as an overreach, turning a targeted sanctions law into a tool for broad economic policy. The dissenting judges countered that IEEPA's language is intentionally broad, giving the president discretion in emergencies. They argued courts should defer to the executive on complex foreign threats. The dissent warned that the majority was substituting its own policy views for legal analysis. This split previews the arguments likely to reach the Supreme Court. The legal fight is now headed for the Supreme Court, with the administration already preparing its appeal. The stakes are massive. The court's decision will determine the legality of the tariffs and set a precedent for presidential power and trade. The current stay keeps tariffs in place until at least October 14, 2025, giving the administration time to seek review. If the Supreme Court hears the case, the tariffs could remain during deliberations, prolonging uncertainty for businesses. If the court strikes down the tariffs, the government must refund hundreds of billions, creating a huge budget hole. If it upholds them, presidential power in trade will expand dramatically. The outcome will reshape the balance of power between Congress and the president. The world is watching, as the decision will impact global trade and America's economic future. The Supreme Court's ruling will define the presidency for years to come. This case is about more than tariffs. It's about the structure of American government and the limits of presidential power. The Supreme Court's decision will define whether the president can unilaterally impose taxes under a national emergency or if that power remains with Congress. For businesses, the outcome will shape the future of international trade, affecting costs, supply chains, and planning. A ruling upholding the tariffs could usher in an era of executive-led trade policy and global uncertainty. Striking them down could restore stability and reaffirm Congress's role in trade. The decision will also affect America's global relationships and the rules-based trading system. Ultimately, the courts are deciding the future of the presidency and America's place in the world. All eyes now turn to the Supreme Court for the final word.